you may not know, but the level of activism, animal rights activism around the United States it's variable. Places like Madison, people come into TV studios and talk to citizens about what's going on in the labs. Other places, people write letters to the editor. We do that here, of course, as well. In the Los Angeles area, things have gotten a little bit more direct. There have been some cars bombed. There have been people have set incendiary devices that have not gone off on researchers' doorsteps. And in response to that, there's a new group that's formed that's been put together by animal researchers. They're calling themselves Pro-Test. That's P-R-O-T-E-S-T. And there's an article in today's UCLA Today, the campus paper, and the headline says, "Hundreds join campus march for science against terror." The lead-in says that UCLA researchers who have for years faced harassment and attacks from anti-animal research activists were heartened as roughly 700 supporters on campus joined them Wednesday, April 22nd. I think this was written ahead of time. Actually, I think the march was yesterday, calling for an end to the intimidation, firebombing, and violent threats. Of course, 700 people turned out because they were at work and they were allowed to leave their jobs at the time and head out. So anyway, the protest was organized by a researcher named David, let me see here. David Jench. David Jench formed the group after extremists set fire to his car, parked in his driveway while he slept on March 7th. This act of violence was followed by online threats to do a lot more damage than to your property. That's quite a threat, isn't it? So you can understand why they would organize and be upset by what was going on. So I read the article, of course. I'm very interested in this sort of thing. And so as I read through there's many articles online. You can go for yourself, just Google News it, and you'll find all these newspaper articles about it. But there really isn't very much information about actually what Jench does. It says that he studies, let me read part of the article to you. I hope this rally lessens the sense of helplessness and fear that has pervaded our community, Jench said as a group marched from the corner of Westwood and LeConte to the Court of Sciences. We're not going to take this harassment anymore. Jench, an associate professor of psychology, whose research includes using monkeys to find treatments for mental disorders such as schizophrenia, is one of about 10 UCLA researchers who've been targets of frequent attacks by extremists. He said he hopes UCLA Pro-Test will help the public understand how essential animal testing is for finding cures and treatments for devastating illnesses. Now, one of the things that they say if you read their stuff is that they say they're doing this because they're trying to create dialogue. But I know of 2 medical doctors that contacted Dr. Jench and asked him to have a public debate about the use of animals in research, and he refused to talk to either one of them publicly. So I couldn't find anything about what David Jench does in the newspaper articles about him, so I did a little research on my own, of course. Here's a paper this was published in 2008. It was published in the journal Neuropsychopharmacology. The title here's the little headline of the paper itself. The paper is called Clozapine Normalizes Prefrontal Cortex Dopamine Transmission in Monkeys Subchronically Exposed to Phencyclidine. In case you don't know, phencyclidine is PCP. Here's what he does. This is from the materials and methods sections of the paper. It says, young adult males or female St. Kitts green monkeys at the St. Kitts Biomedical Research Foundation were used. As the subjects were feral monkeys, their exact age was not known. In St. Kitts and other parts of the Caribbean, they have feral colonies of monkeys that were just released years and years ago, and periodically they'll round them up and sell them, use them in their own research. But generally, the monkeys are wild living. And that's the monkeys that they used in these studies. It says that the studies were approved by the relevant institutional animal care and use committee. The monkeys, housed individually in squeeze cages, were injected with PCP twice daily for 14 days, as described before in a paper that Jentsch wrote in 1997. Now, you have to understand, of course, is that these monkeys are normally living in these very large groups. They have very close social relationships with each other, and then all of a sudden they're trapped. They're put individually in these cages, squeeze cages, so that people can come by, push the cage walls together, and then inject them with PCP. I've never known anybody or heard of anybody injecting PCP. I think PCP is almost always smoked. I've heard that it's a heinous drug. Anyway, it turns out what he's doing is he's injecting the monkeys with PCP twice daily because he believes that it creates a model of schizophrenia. He thinks it drives the monkeys essentially psychotic. Then he says that clozapine is a drug that's used to treat schizophrenia in humans, and it's been used at least since the early 1970s. It was first discovered in 1958, I think, maybe even earlier, and then it became a fairly common drug that's used for schizophrenia in the early 1970s. So there have been at least thousands and thousands and thousands of people that have been taking clozapine regularly for their schizophrenia. In the monkeys anyway, clozapine or clozapine vehicle was injected for 3 days following our previous regimen, starting 7 or 8 days after the completion of the PCP treatment. Some monkeys did not receive clozapine and were not injected with clozapine vehicle. Let's see. The animals were rapidly euthanized after the final clozapine dose by an injection of sodium pentobarbital. So that's what he's doing. He's trying to induce some sort of psychotic or psychosis in the monkeys, and then he's treating them with this drug that's been used in humans for the past almost 40 years apparently. So that's the guy who started the group Pro-Test, because he says that he needs to be allowed to cure human diseases. Now, as I went down and read through the UCLA article, one of the people that spoke was a neurology professor named Claude Westerlane. It says actually in the article his name is Claude Westerlane. Actually, they misspelled his name. His name is Claude Westerlane. He uses animals in his research on epilepsy, it says, and he came to the rally to oppose the terror tactics that some of his colleagues have faced. So I thought, I wonder who this Claude Westerlane is and what does he actually do in his research. It turns out that he uses a drug. He studies epilepsy. It's epilepsy called, what is it called? I can't remember the kind. It's the where did I write this down? Hang on just a second. It's, I don't know where I wrote it down. He injects a drug called lithium carpine into rats' brains. And when an animal is injected with this drug called lithium pilocarpine, they're dead within 24 hours. It induces a single, continuous, unremitting seizure. They start to seize immediately, and they apparently seize until they die. And he claims that this is a model for epilepsy, but if you start reading if you enter lithium pilocarpine into Google, the only thing you find that it's used for is to create these long, intense seizures in animals that they apparently, it's one continuous, unremitting seizure. So that's what he's doing. And he says that he ought to be allowed to keep doing that. There's real questions. Apparently when people go into seizures, we typically almost always recover. But the animals that are injected with this disease, they never recover. And we know the cause of their seizures, don't we? One of the people that spoke at the rally was Vice Chancellor Gerald Levy. Gerald Levy, of course, stood up and said that we need to keep saving human lives through animal research. He says, many diseases that ravage the world, I'm reading from the UCLA article, many diseases that ravage the world are now preventable. treatable, or have been eradicated altogether. Think about it. Immunizations against smallpox, and then he goes on and lists many diseases, in fact, that he claims that animal research has led to the end of. But he started out with smallpox. And here's the issue, of course, is that when researchers list the 10s and 20s and 30s of diseases, hundreds of diseases that they claim have been cured because of the use of animals, somebody who questions those sorts of things is really sort of at a disadvantage, because now you have to go through one at a time and see if any of those things are true. But in this case, he started with smallpox. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting, because I just read a book about smallpox. The book is great, and this is sort of maybe my book talk section of the show. This is The Speckled Monster. I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's about a woman named Lady Mary Wortley Montague, who traveled to the Ottoman Empire. And she learned that people there were doing something. They were taking the pus from people who had smallpox and then were gathering it in little teeny bits, and they were going to people who hadn't yet had smallpox, and they were making a slice and sticking under their skin. They were essentially immunizing them. And in fact, it worked. And they did this they had been doing it for a long time. Some research says it's been going back, was done in the 10th century in China, in fact. So anyway, it got carried she took it back to England when she moved there. She had the royal children were vaccinated in 1722 is when she had her children. Shortly after, all of the royal family had their children vaccinated. I shouldn't say vaccinated, that's incorrect. She had them, it was called variolation, because the virus that causes smallpox is called variola. So everybody was being variolated. They were using the smallpox vaccine, the smallpox pus, actually to inoculate people. So it was in 1796 that Edward Jenner started noticing that that in the United States, he had, by the way, he'd received variolation, so he was immune to smallpox as well. But he noticed that milkmaids didn't seem to get smallpox, even though they had not been immunized with the variolation. So he conjectured, and in fact he wasn't the first, that maybe one of the other poxes, the cowpox, the pig pox, would in fact cause some sort of immunity to smallpox. And so he tried using cowpox from the poxes, the little pustules on the hands of milkmaids, and he used that to inoculate a young boy. And in fact, the boy turned out, even though he was challenged, Jenner challenged him many times with smallpox, and the boy appeared to be immune. So that disease is called vaccinia in cows. Vacca is the Latin word for cow. And so hence we have vaccination today, and vaccination has now become an interchangeable term with immunization. But the chancellor for research the vice chancellor for research at UCLA seems to think that animal research led to vaccinations, and of course it didn't. Jenner was, oddly enough, was a very close, maybe not so oddly, was a close observer of nature. One of his famous things is he was the person who discovered that cuckoos, that it was, once the eggs hatch, it was the babies that pushed the other eggs and the other baby birds out of the nest. And he was better known for being a sort of an ornithologist and person who studied the behavior of cuckoos than he was immunology. A little side fact there.